My parents let me sleep in my car at 18. 7 years later, they waited outside my office. I remember every detail of that night. The way the rain sounded against the windows of our suburban Seattle home. The smell of my mother's coffee going cold on the kitchen table. The look in my father's eyes when he told me I had until Sunday to get out. I was 18 years old, fresh out of high school, holding an acceptance letter to Seattle Community College. Not Harvard. Not some prestigious university. Just community college. But it was mine. It was a start. My father called it tough love. Said I needed to learn what the real world looked like. That I'd made my choice by not getting a full scholarship. As if I hadn't tried. As if partial scholarships and working part-time wasn't enough effort. I looked at my mother that night hoping she'd say something. Anything. Her eyes filled with tears, but she stayed silent. That silence hurt more than anything my father said. Because silence is a choice too. It's permission. It's agreement wrapped in cowardice. I stood there in our living room, the same room where we'd opened Christmas presents and watched movies together, and I realized I was completely alone. The people who were supposed to protect me had decided I was now a burden to be removed. I packed everything I owned that night. 18 years of life reduced to what could fit in 2 bags and a cardboard box. I left behind the family photo from Disneyland, the one from when I was 12 and we were still happy. I left it face down on my dresser. I couldn't look at those smiling faces anymore. Through the thin walls of our house, I could hear them arguing downstairs. My mother saying I was just a boy. My father insisting I was an adult now. Funny how I was adult enough to be thrown out, but not adult enough to have my fears or struggles taken seriously. Sunday morning came too fast. June in Seattle meant gray skies and wet streets even when the rain stopped. I loaded my car in silence, making 3 trips from my bedroom to my beaten 2008 Honda Civic. The same car they'd bought me for my 16th birthday with the promise it would get me through college. The irony wasn't lost on me. Each time I walked past the front door, I waited for it to open. For someone to stop me. To say they'd changed their minds. No one did. The curtains didn't move. The door stayed closed. The house remained silent as if I'd already become a ghost to them. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, engine running, staring at that house in my rearview mirror. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I kept thinking someone would come out. That my mother would run down the driveway in her bathrobe, crying, saying it was all a mistake. But the door never opened. So I put the car in drive and pulled away. I watched that house disappear around the corner and something inside me disappeared with it. Trust maybe. Or the belief that family meant unconditional love. I had $340 in my checking account, a quarter tank of gas and absolutely nowhere to go. I was 18 years old and I was homeless. The first night I slept in my car, I parked behind a grocery store in South Seattle. I couldn't bring myself to stay in my own neighborhood. The thought of someone I knew seeing me was unbearable. The shame was crushing. I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go, pulled my sleeping bag up to my chin, and stared at the ceiling of my Honda until sunrise. I didn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. Every pair of headlights that swept across my windows made me think it was police coming to move me along or worse. I'd never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, so completely powerless in my entire life. By the 3rd day I'd figured out a system. I'd park in the far corner of the Walmart parking lot on MLK Way. There were always a few other cars there. RVs, vans, other vehicles with fogged windows. A small, invisible community of people like me who had nowhere else to go. Nobody bothered us as long as we stayed quiet and didn't cause problems. I got a job at that Walmart, working the night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., stocking shelves for $11.50 an hour. It meant I could stay awake all night working and sleep in my car during the day when it was safer, when the parking lot was full and I could blend in. I learned quickly that being homeless wasn't just about not having a roof over your head. It was about losing your dignity piece by piece. It was about showering at a 24-hour gym because it was cheaper than renting a room. It was about brushing your teeth in gas station bathrooms and hoping nobody noticed you were wearing the same jeans 3 days in a row. It was about eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner while scrolling through apartment listings you couldn't afford. Studios for $1,200 a month. Rooms in shared houses for $900 plus first and last month's rent and a deposit. I'd need to save for 6 months just to get my foot in the door anywhere. My phone buzzed constantly those first few weeks. Friends from high school asking where I'd been, why I wasn't hanging out anymore. I stopped answering. How do you explain to people with normal lives that you're living in your car? That you're showering at a gym and working a night shift just to survive? You don't. You just disappear. You let them think you're busy, that you've moved on, that everything's fine. Because the alternative, the pity, the judgment, the inevitable, why don't you just go home, was worse than the isolation. But here's what nobody tells you about hitting rock bottom at 18. It clarifies things. When you have nothing, when you're truly alone, you learn what you're made of. You learn that nobody's coming to save you. That the safety nets you thought existed, family, society, the system, have holes big enough to fall through. You learn that the only person you can truly depend on is yourself. And you learn to be grateful for the smallest things. A hot shower. A full tank of gas. A shift that doesn't get cut short. These became my victories. One afternoon, after my Walmart shift and a few hours of sleep in my car, I walked into a small tech startup in the Soto district. I'd taught myself Python the year before using free online tutorials, built a basic inventory management system for a school project. It wasn't much, but it was something. I showed it to the founder, a guy named Derek who wore hoodies and actually listened when I talked. He hired me on the spot as a junior developer. Part-time, minimum wage, but it was a foot in the door. It was hope. I worked 2 jobs for the next year. Walmart nights, the tech startup during the day. I slept 4 hours if I was lucky, usually in my car between shifts, parked in different lots to avoid suspicion. I showed up on time, worked harder than everyone else, taught myself everything I could. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew what it felt like to have nothing. I knew I never wanted to feel that way again. And I knew that the only way out was through the exhaustion, through the hunger, through the shame and the fear and the loneliness. So I kept going. One day at a time. $1 at a time. One skill at a time. Building a future in silence while my parents lived 30 minutes away as if I'd never existed. After 14 months of sleeping in my car, I finally saved enough for a room in a shared house in Beacon Hill. It wasn't much, a 10 by 10 space with a mattress on the floor, a closet, and a window that didn't quite close all the way. But it had a door that locked. It had a roof. It had an address I could put on job applications. The first night I slept there, I cried. Not from sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like my body was purging a year's worth of tension all at once. The tech startup where I'd been working part-time offered me a full-time position. Derek, the founder, had noticed my work ethic, my willingness to learn, my ability to solve problems nobody else wanted to touch. I quit Walmart the next day. No 2 weeks notice, no farewell. I just turned in my vest and walked out. That chapter was closed. I was 20 years old, making $38,000 a year as a junior software developer, and for the first time since leaving home I could breathe. I threw myself into work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. While my coworkers went out for drinks after work, I stayed late learning new programming languages, taking on extra projects, volunteering for the assignments nobody wanted. I watched how the senior developers worked, how they thought, how they solved problems. I studied business strategy, read books on entrepreneurship, took free online courses on everything from project management to digital marketing. Because I'd learned something crucial during those months in my car. Knowledge was the only thing nobody could take from you. By 22, I'd been promoted twice. I was leading development projects, managing junior developers, and getting recruited by bigger companies. But I didn't want to work for someone else forever. I'd seen too many startups fail, too many good ideas ruined by poor execution. I'd learned that success wasn't just about working hard. It was about working smart, about timing, about finding problems that people would pay to solve. So I started planning. Saving every extra dollar. Building connections. Learning the business side of tech, not just the coding side. At 23, I left the startup and launched my own company with 2 partners I'd met in the industry. We called it Apex Solutions. We built custom software for mid-sized businesses. Companies too big for off-the-shelf solutions but too small for enterprise systems. It was a gap in the market nobody was filling well. The first year was brutal. We worked 100-hour weeks, maxed out credit cards, lived on ramen and coffee. There were moments I thought we'd fail. Moments I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake leaving a stable job. But we didn't fail. By year 2 we had 15 clients and hired our first employees. By year 3, we'd expanded to 2 offices and 30 employees. By year 4 we were generating $7 million in annual revenue and I'd bought my first house. A small Craftsman in Capitol Hill. Nothing extravagant, but it was mine. Truly mine. Every mortgage payment was proof that I'd built something real, something lasting, something nobody could take away. Those 7 years changed me in ways I'm still understanding. The kid who slept in his car, who showered at gyms, who ate peanut butter sandwiches and worked 2 jobs. That kid was gone. In his place was someone harder, more focused, less trusting. I'd learned to rely only on myself. I'd learned that the people who should love you unconditionally might not. I'd learned that success was the best response to abandonment, even if it couldn't fill the hole their absence had left. I never contacted my parents during those 7 years. Not once. I didn't send a Christmas card or a birthday text. I didn't drive past the old house or check their social media. I erased them as completely as they'd erased me. Sometimes late at night I'd wonder if they thought about me. If they regretted what they'd done. If my father's tough love kept him awake at night. But mostly I didn't think about them at all. I was too busy building the life they'd decided I didn't deserve their help with. At 25, Apex Solutions moved into a renovated building in downtown Seattle. 5 floors, glass and steel, with our name on the lobby directory. I had an office on the top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Sometimes I'd stand there looking out at the city, thinking about the kid who'd slept in a Walmart parking lot just miles from here. The distance between those two versions of myself felt impossible and yet completely real. I'd done it. I'd survived. I'd built something. And I'd done it completely alone. It was a Tuesday morning in November when they showed up. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked on the door. Her expression was strange, uncomfortable, uncertain. She told me there were 2 people in the lobby asking to see me. They didn't have an appointment. They said they were my parents. For a moment I couldn't process the words. My parents. After 7 years of absolute silence, they were here. In my building. Waiting in my lobby. I told my assistant I'd be down in 10 minutes. I needed those 10 minutes to prepare. To breathe. To remember who I was now versus who I'd been the last time I saw them. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The designer suit, the confident posture, the face that no longer showed the desperation of an 18-year-old with nowhere to go. Then I went downstairs. They were sitting on the leather couch in our modern lobby, looking small and out of place among the sleek furniture and contemporary art. My father had gained weight, his hair thinner and grayer. My mother looked older, lines around her eyes I didn't remember. They stood when they saw me, and for a split second something flickered in my chest. Some ancient, buried instinct that wanted to run to them, to hug them, to hear them say they were sorry. But I didn't run. I stood there, hands in my pockets, and waited for them to speak. My father started talking. Something about seeing an article about my company in the Seattle Times, about being proud, about always knowing I'd do well. He said it casually, like we'd just seen each other last week. Like 7 years hadn't passed. Like he hadn't thrown his 18-year-old son out with nowhere to go. My mother stood beside him, nodding along but still not really speaking. Still choosing silence. Then he got to the point. They needed help. My mother's medical bills from a surgery. My father's business had failed. They'd refinanced the house twice and were facing foreclosure. They needed money. Not a small amount, $60,000. He said it like it was nothing, like I owed them, like they hadn't abandoned me when I needed them most. And the entire time he talked, he never once said he was sorry. Never once acknowledged what they'd done. Never once asked how I'd survived those years. I let him finish. Let him lay out all their problems, all their needs, all their expectations. Then I spoke for the first time, and my voice was calm, cold, completely controlled. I told them I remembered the night they kicked me out. I told them about sleeping in my car for 14 months. About showering at gyms. About working 2 jobs and surviving on 3 hours of sleep. About building everything they saw around them. This company, this success, this life. Completely alone. Without them. In spite of them. I told them that their tough love had taught me exactly what they intended. That I couldn't depend on anyone but myself. That family was just a word, and words without action meant nothing. I told them I'd learned that lesson so well that I'd become everything they said I needed to be. Strong. Independent. Successful. Self-made. And I'd done it by cutting out the dead weight. Just like they'd taught me. My father's face turned red. He started to argue, to justify, to explain that they'd done what they thought was best. That I clearly turned out fine, that their approach had worked. That's when I smiled, not with warmth, but with the cold satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting 7 years for this exact moment. I told him he was absolutely right. Their approach had worked. It had taught me to be ruthless. To eliminate anything in my life that didn't serve my goals. To cut ties with people who took more than they gave. I told them I wouldn't be giving them money. Not $60,000. Not $60. Not 60 cents. That if they needed help, they should pull themselves up by their bootstraps, get a second job, learn what the real world looked like. I used my father's exact words from that night 7 years ago, and I watched them land like physical blows. My mother started crying. My father's jaw clenched. But I felt nothing. Just cold, complete emptiness where love used to be. I told them they weren't welcome here. That if they showed up again, security would escort them out. That I'd built this company, this life, this success without them, and I'd continue without them. That they'd made their choice 7 years ago, and now I was making mine. Then I turned and walked back to the elevator, leaving them standing in the lobby of the building that bore my company's name, in the success they'd decided I had to earn without them. As the elevator doors closed, I saw my mother collapse onto the couch, sobbing. My father stood frozen, shocked, unable to process that the powerless kid they'd thrown away had become someone who could throw them away just as easily. And I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just a profound, aching emptiness. Because revenge doesn't heal wounds. It just proves you survived them. Back in my office, I stood at those floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at Seattle at the life I'd built from absolutely nothing. I thought about the 18-year-old kid sleeping in his car, terrified and alone. I thought about every choice that had led from that parking lot to this office. And I realized something. My parents hadn't just taught me to be independent. They taught me that some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. That some choices have consequences that last forever. That tough love is just cruelty with a prettier name. 7 years ago, they'd thrown me out believing I'd come crawling back humbled and grateful. Instead, I'd become someone who didn't need them at all. Someone who'd learned to survive without the safety net of family. Someone who'd discovered that the only person you can truly count on is yourself. They'd wanted to teach me a lesson about the real world. And I'd learned it. Just not the lesson they'd intended. I never saw them again after that day. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they lost the house, moved to a smaller place outside the city. Sometimes I wonder if my father still tells himself it was tough love, if he still believes he did the right thing. Sometimes I wonder if my mother regrets her silence. But mostly I don't wonder at all. Because I learned something else during those 7 years. You can't save people who threw you away. You can only save yourself. And sometimes the coldest revenge is simply succeeding without them. Proving that everything they said you couldn't do without them you did. Better. Stronger. Completely alone. That's the lesson of tough love. You learn to be tough. And you learn that love, real love, would never have let you sleep in your car in the first place.